Welcome to Alpha Kappa Psi's webinar titled Understanding Policy and Positive Confrontation. This webinar is part of the Risk Management series. My name is Mackenzie Lauka, and I serve AK Psi as the Associate Director of Education. I'll be your webcast producer. Before we dive into the content, I would like to review the web-based features available to you. This webinar will be advanced remotely. By the bottom of your screen, there are multiple application widgets that you can use throughout the program. I encourage you to utilize the widgets to download additional resources, connect with other attendees during the presentation, and share highlights via social media. A copy of the slide deck and other additional materials are available in the resource list widget that looks like a green folder. The group chat is available for you to interact with other attendees and the presenter during the presentation. When posting, it will share your first name and last initial, but be sure to mention your chapter or university. If you have any technical difficulty, please click on the Help widget. It has a question mark icon and covers common technical issues. Additionally, each of the windows on your screen are able to be resized, moved, and adjusted to fit your individual learning need. At the end of the program, I'll explain how you can ask a question to our panelists. If you have a question throughout the program, however, you can launch the Q&A widget to submit your question. Your questions will be asked at the end of the program in the order they are received. Be sure to also check out our social media content. Portions of today's program will be tweeted using the hashtag AKPsiChat. You can follow along using the Twitter widget in the menu dock at the bottom of the screen, as well as post highlights to your own Twitter feed using the hashtag. You may also find some valuable resources on the AKPsi blog, Facebook page, Instagram feed, LinkedIn page, Twitter feed, and our YouTube channel, each of which are available from the akpsi.org homepage. Risk management is a part of the fraternity that requires ongoing education to be up to date on the latest changes to the policies and remind yourself of what to do in case something goes wrong. During the webinar, you will gain a firm understanding of AKPsi's risk management policies, learn the process if something goes wrong, and better understand how to resolve conflicts in your chapter rationally and effectively. In addition to covering these topics, we'll leave time for your questions. For our program today, we have one presenter who's going to provide guidance and support while and awareness, so you walk away from today's program with new insight on the topic. At this point, I'd like to introduce our presenter. Chrissy was initiated in 1998 by the Iota Xi chapter at Arizona State University, the same chapter her dad was the founding father of in 1972. She served in many executive positions, including president and MOR, and was bestowed a first and second degree bronze DSA prior to graduation. She received the Silver DSA in 2011. Chrissy joined the Heritage Center staff as an expansion coordinator and was promoted to Director of Member Development. She ended her staff career as Director of Chapter Services and Risk Management and is now the Treasurer on the Board of Directors. Chrissy is now the Executive Director of Back on My Feet Indianapolis, a nonprofit that addresses the social and emotional side of homelessness by utilizing a running program to build confidence and discipline to help members work towards self-sufficiency in housing and employment. Christy has experience in nonprofit management and fund development and is a certified fundraising executive. Christy has a BS in marketing from Arizona State University and an MBA in marketing from Indiana University. Christy is passionate about triathlons and has competed several 70.3 races and won a 140.6 race. She loves music, running, golf, home improvement projects, and volunteering. She serves on the board of the Association of Fundraising Professionals, delivers Meals on Wheels, and was published in Business Horizons Journal, which was then printed as a business case by Harvard Business Review. Now to get started with the presentation, I'll hand it off to Chrissy.
Thanks, Mackenzie. I want to start off with a disclaimer. The agenda for today's webinar is simple, but risk management is not. Risk management deals with a lot of great issues and situations that might happen. So it is important to remember that ongoing discussions are really the best trainings regarding risk management. Be sure to ask questions today if you don't understand, and if a question arises later that you don't know the answer to, be sure to tell everyone in your chapter that you will ask somebody and report back. Making up information that is incorrect will only hurt your chapter in the long run. Now, Webster's defines risk management or risk as someone or something that creates or suggests a hazard, and risk management is a solution or strategy to minimize or mitigate risk. We often think of risk management as something that only relates to alcohol, but really risk management is something we all practice every day in our lives as a way to make a healthy decision. So for example, we wear seat belts to mitigate risk in driving. And so that way, if we get in an accident, we might be able to help ourselves and others. We wear shoes because pavement and concrete are not soft and we don't want to hurt or cut our feet. These two examples are really simple, but they illustrate the things that we might do to mitigate risk. But they also highlight the fact that we are not only trying to reduce our own risk, but risk that comes from our interactions with others. Having said that, fraternities are notorious for engaging in risky behaviors. Chapters and members need to learn to reduce risk in order to protect themselves and preserve the good name of the fraternity. So let's cover a few of our risk management policies. The first policy we're going to discuss tonight is the alcohol and drug policy. This was put in place to protect members and ensure that all of our members follow the law of their state, city, and especially the university or college campus. When you're a student, you are required to follow the rules of your specific campus, as well as make yourself aware of the rules of your own town. Even though you're in the college bubble, the drinking age is still always 21. When it comes to our chapters, we don't say you can't drink. You just have to do it responsibly and legally. The only area where alcohol is restricted and is exactly not allowed is during the pledge programming. I will repeat myself. Pledge programming should not contain any alcohol. In the context of risk management, a pledge program may be defined as an event designed for pledges, hosted by pledges, or otherwise included in the pledge class calendar. But if the event does not meet any of those caveats, alcohol is allowed and provided if you follow specific guidelines. Also, an unwritten rule and just kind of a general rule of thumb is if the pledge feels like they need to attend a certain event, whether to get interviews, whether to be with the members so that way they can be considered for membership, then it would be considered a pledge event and alcohol should not be present. The first option, preferred by most of the fraternity, is to have a no-host cash bar with a professional bartender that is fully covered with liability insurance. Fraternity parties should follow the no-host cash bar type event if a professional is serving the alcohol and can be checking IDs for age requirements. This doesn't mean that if Brother Smith works at the Thirsty Saloon, then he can be the bartender for the event. It must be a third-party bartender with insurance coverage. The other acceptable option is BYOB, or bring your own bottle, where members and invited guests of the legal drinking age may bring and or consume alcoholic beverages. When this option is chosen, the quantity of alcohol an individual may bring or possess is limited to the amount a reasonable person can consume in one sitting, with an emphasis placed on reasonable person. So, for example, if you roll into the party with a keg, that's not a reasonable amount that one person could consume. A lot of what goes into what's a reasonable amount depends on gender, male or female, as well as size and tolerance. No matter the option chosen, under no circumstances should alcoholic beverages be purchased using the chapter, pledge class, or fraternity funds, nor may any member coordinate the collection or provide funds such as for that purpose, even if all the members consuming are of the age of alcohol consumption. This includes passing the hat, slush funds, etc. As well, no chapter should co-sponsor or co-fund a function where another host organization purchases alcohol for the event. Drinking games are also prohibited. Why do you think drinking games are not allowed? What is the purpose of drinking games? If there is a prize or any other game where the purpose is to make your opponents drink, this usually leads to excessive drinking and dangerous consequences. Anytime a chapter hosts an event with alcohol present, there should be a reasonable amount of precautions to prevent excessive drinking, which may include limiting the amount of alcohol at the party or setting an early enough cutoff time. Each event must have a published cutoff time, and those arriving intoxicated should not be allowed to the event or party. You should also provide plenty of non-alcoholic beverages for underage members and those that do not wish to consume alcohol. One area of this policy where members often get tripped up is the requirement that designated members who will not be drinking should be present at events. This does not mean having a designated driver program. Those are not encouraged nor recommended by the fraternity. Alpha Kappa Psi's insurance carrier has recommended that the fraternity or its chapters not set up a designated driver program. People suspected of being intoxicated should utilize cabs or Uber, stay the night, or use public transportation. But there should always be designated individuals who are not drinking to keep an eye on the event and be able to manage the risk should anything arise. The most recent addition to the policy includes that no chapter may co-sponsor an event with a brewery, vineyard, distillery, alcohol distributor, or tavern, at which alcohol is given away, sold, or otherwise provided to those present. For all purposes, a tavern is defined as an establishment generating more than half of its annual gross sales from alcohol. Chapters cannot fundraise at bars when alcohol is involved in the fundraiser, or work with a bar to charge a cover fee or sell cups, wristbands, or other merchandise at the door that can be used to consume alcohol or provide a discount once inside. Another area of risk is hazing. Alpha Kappa Psi does not tolerate hazing in any manner. Hazing activities include, but are not limited to, the use of alcohol and forced consumption of any food or liquid. We actually had a chapter 10 years ago that was requiring their pledges to do shots of maple syrup and ranch dressing, in which the university found out that that was hazing. Paddling in any form, creation of excessive fatigue, physical or psychological shocks, kidnapping of pledges by members or kidnapping of members by pledges, late work sessions which interfere with scholastic activities, being forced to wear blindfolds or having to engage in public stunts of buffoonery, morally degrading or humiliating games and activities, and any other activities on the part of the members of the pledges which are not consistent with fraternity law, ritual, or policy in any state, city, county, or university laws or regulations. Lineups and unapproved scavenger hunts are also considered hazing. To be considered not hazing for a scavenger hunt, this must be approved ahead of time by Brian Parker and the Judiciary Committee. If you aren't sure whether something your chapter is doing may be considered hazing, look for some of the warning signs of hazing. Pledges crying at a ritual or dropping out after the pledge process. Crying is never a good sign, and if they're dropping out after a ritual, you should reevaluate how you're conducting your ceremonies. Pledges complaining that they do not understand the purpose of the activity. If you can't explain the purpose or say the purpose of an event is time management, brotherhood, or tradition, you should reconsider why you're having it. Resorting to scare tactics to motivate the pledges. Pledges having a strong bond to their fellow pledge brothers but not to the student chapter. Members resisting change. This generally comes from those who are still angry or bitter about the hazing done to them, and they expect others to be abused just as they were. Continuing to do an event or activity because you're afraid you will lose the alumni support. Sometimes you have to cut your losses, and there's times where you have to ask the alumni not to come on to an event. There's no trend between those chapters that condone hazing and those that give back to the fraternity. If you sell it the right way, alumni should be understanding that the change is required over time. And I must stress that you, as the current chapter members, are the caretaker of that charter. You are the ones protecting it, not the alumni. A lot of times when we talk about hazing, people understand that it's not a good thing, but it continues to happen. When asked why Alpha Kappa Psi chapters haze, the most common reasons given are to foster unity, to work on the pledges' problem-solving abilities, to teach the pledges to work under pressure, to help others develop new leadership skills, to instill a sense of membership, earn your way into brotherhood, to work on time management skills, to be more confident. Realize all these reasons can be achieved in a more positive manner besides hazing. While we've already defined hazing, there are some questions you can ask yourself to determine if an activity might be considered hazing. Would an active member be willing to do what the new member is being asked to do? Would you be reluctant to share the details with alumni and volunteers, the school administration, or parents? Would you object if the information was published in the news? If any of these answers to these questions create concern, then the event needs to stop. If you think your chapter is hazing, please let someone know. As a fraternity, we're more than willing to work with a chapter who comes to us wanting to fix a problem than if we just find out about it. We are more willing to be proactive with you if you come to us and say, how can I solve this? How can I better achieve this event with something else, than for us to get a call that something's gone wrong or the university is investigating you. So with an increase in access to technology and social media, another policy that's often violated is the publication of inappropriate materials. Members are prohibited from producing or publishing or distributing any material, whether written or electronically, as text, audio, video, or some combination of all three, is deemed harmful to the good name and reputation of the fraternity. This policy is relatively new. It came about 10 years ago when the fraternity witnessed an increase of complaints generated from pictures, videos, texts, posts on chapter websites, MySpace, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Most of you likely have one or many accounts on social media. Realize that what you post is not private. Even if you have the privacy settings updated, the people you do give access to see your information can still repost, screenshot, and share what you've posted without your permission. Privacy settings are always changing, so even if you think what you're posting won't be seen by someone, there's always ways around it. Secondly, what you post is a direct reflection on the organizations you represent, and it's also a direct representation on you and your personal brand. Your words and actions represent the fraternity, so consider what the image is and how it may be perceived. Even if you don't see anything wrong with a post or an image, consider how others might. Some examples of negative images include images of alcohol, drugs, explicit or graphic in nature on a chapter website, images of brothers drunk at a party with a caption that says AK Side Rush, Big Brother or Little Brother Social. These images can tarnish the good name of the fraternity and also hurt you personally when you go look for a job. So as you're hearing all the policies and what not to do, you may be wondering what's the worst that can happen. I posted an inappropriate photo. So what? So let's take a poll and see what you think happens. The poll question is, when a risk management policy is broken, what consequences can happen? Okay, so at least 100% of you thought that the chapter can go on probation. 66% thought that there would be a warning. 66% thought that a member could be expelled. 66% thought that a chapter could be closed or members could pay a fine. Sometimes it may be as simple as being asked to remove the image. In other cases, it can be more severe. The Board of Directors Statement of Policy specifically mentions the President, VP of Membership, and Pledge Educator as those being directly responsible for hazing of pledges, and chapters found in violation of the hazing policies may end up with the fraternity removing those officers in those positions. Additionally, any officer or other person in a position with authority within the chapter found to be responsible for violating these policies may be removed from office by the fraternity. A chapter found guilty of violating the policies will be subject to a probationary period. The probationary period can vary depending on the violation, but it will generally include, but is not limited to, mandatory events such as hazing awareness workshops, alcohol awareness workshops, and risk management workshops. Additionally, the chapter will be subject to having their chapter name and offenses published in the diary, increased insurance premiums for the probationary period, and other requirements deemed necessary by the fraternity. Guilty chapters may also be required to reimburse the fraternity for expenses incurred during the conduction of an investigation. These expenses are not cheap and can be upwards of a few $1,000s. These requirements will be outlined in the chapter action plan, which is approved by the Board of Directors and provided at the conclusion of an investigation where the chapter was found responsible. In more severe cases, individuals may be suspended or even expelled from the fraternity, and ultimately the chapter stands to have their charter revoked, which means the chapter would no longer exist. Fraternity policies are not to be taken lightly, and any member or alumni that is aware of a risky situation should step in and try to prevent it from occurring or talk to somebody on staff to get alternatives. So what can you do to help yourself? In order to avoid all those consequences, there are many choices chapters can make to help reduce their risk and avoid breaking policies. An easy way is to create a compliance committee. The purpose of forming and maintaining a chapter compliance committee is to ensure the chapter is following policies outlined in the Board of Directors Statement of Policy, the chapter bylaws, and the university policy. In the event that a conflict is discovered, the Compliance Committee would be responsible for bringing this to the attention of the chapter and assuring that the bylaws are amended accordingly. Additionally, the Compliance Committee should strive to discover new ideas for mitigating risk and suggest amendments to the bylaws to reflect those ideas. If the chapter bylaws are in conflict with their governing document as mentioned above, the change can automatically be made. No vote is necessary. To start, the Compliance Committee should review each activity in the chapter and the events the chapter conducts, even pledge activities, to ensure that there isn't anything that conflicts with fraternity or university policies, and make sure potential risks associated with an event are reduced. If there is a conflict, this needs to be discussed with the chapter so the chapter can decide how the event in question will be changed so it's in line with the policies. As new events and activities are planned, the Compliance Committee should be involved to discuss or review the activities of the chapter to ensure that these activities are carried out in accordance with the governing documents. In addition to the Compliance Committee part of the planning process, it is encouraged that the Compliance Committee also participate in the execution of the event to ensure that violations do not occur during the event. If this is not possible, have the entire committee at the event ensure at least one member is present. Once the event is complete, the Compliance Committee should meet with the committee that was in charge of planning the event to ensure that the most success in the future. This debrief should be documented using a planning guide. An example is on page 100 to 102 of the Road to Brotherhood. The Compliance Committee should be seen as a valuable resource to the chapter committees as they work on projects. In cases where an event occurs which the Compliance Committee advises against this because of risk management issues, it is the responsibility of the Compliance Committee to report this to the chapter advisor and or regional director and Heritage Center staff. The Compliance Committee members should be very familiar with the Board of Directors Statement of Policy, chapter bylaws, and the university policy. It is with this knowledge that the Compliance Committee will ensure that the chapter is not violating the policies and regulations. The governing documents of the fraternity are amended periodically, so it's the responsibility of the chapter to ensure that its bylaws do not themselves violate the Board of Directors Statement of Policy or the Constitution and Statutory Code. The Compliance Committee should review these governing documents at least once per academic term, semester, or trimester to ensure that this is not the case. The Constitution and Statutory Code, the Board of Directors Statement of Policy, all supersede the chapter bylaws. So in cases where an alleged violation has occurred within the chapter's Judicial Review Board, or JRB, would be responsible for investigating these acts. Keep in mind there's a difference between fraternity's Judiciary Committee and a chapter's Judicial Review Board. Chapters can create a Judicial Review Board to be the first line of investigation within the chapter. The fraternity's Judiciary Committee can provide guidance and be available for consultation during the investigation at the chapter level, but the chapter does a majority of the work and then submits their results to the fraternity's Judiciary Committee. So for example, let's say that Brother Smith was drinking underage at a chapter party, even though she had been warned against doing so. The chapter's JRB would investigate this using the policies outlined in the Board of Directors Statement of Policy. After the JRB had finished its case against Brother Smith, it would forward the findings and results of the investigation to the fraternity's JC. While the JRB should be a standing committee, this group should continuously ask why incidents are happening, especially if the JRB is called upon to conduct investigations on a regular basis. If the JRB observes a pattern of behavior, it is their responsibility to determine if a suggested course of action and present it to the chapter. So to reiterate, the JRB should not be used on a regular basis. If you're called more than a few times a year, then there's some fundamental issues to address. Perhaps the chapter is attracting the wrong type of member, or the risk management policies are not being properly reviewed with members each term. If your chapter doesn't have a compliance committee or JRB and are interested in starting one, there are steps, guidance, and instruction on how to do so on the Forms and Document page of the website. Also, don't be afraid to ask the Fraternity Judiciary Committee for help. That's what they're there for, and they want to help proactively as much as possible. Nobody in the fraternity wants to see a chapter or individual get in trouble or put our fraternity's name at risk, so we are always willing to help. So let's talk about the chain of command. There's a chain of command type structure within the fraternity. In the event a brother identifies a problem or witnesses a violation, it is the responsibility of that brother to bring this to the attention of the Compliance Committee or the chapter president. The Compliance Committee and or president of the chapter should then determine if the problem can be solved locally or if it's necessary to inform the chapter advisor and/or regional director. The regional director would then take this information to the Judiciary Committee for further action if necessary. In many cases, conflict in the chapter just seems to be a fact of life. We've all seen situations where different people with different goals and needs have come into conflict. And we've all seen the often intense personal animosity that can result. The fact that this conflict exists, however, is not necessarily a bad thing, as long as it's resolved effectively and can lead to personal and professional growth. In many cases, effective conflict resolution can make the difference between positive and negative outcomes. The good news is that by resolving conflict successfully, you can solve many of the problems that have been brought to the surface, as well as getting benefits that you might not first expect. You're going to get an increased understanding. The discussion needed to resolve conflict expands people's awareness of the situation, giving them an insight on how they can achieve their own goals without undermining those of other people. Increased group cohesion. While conflict is resolved effectively, team members can develop a stronger mutual respect and a renewed faith in their ability to work together. Improved self-knowledge. Conflict pushes individuals to examine their goals in close detail, helping them to understand the things that are most important to them, sharpening their focus and enhancing their effectiveness. However, if conflict is not handled effectively, the results can be damaging. Conflicting goals can quickly turn into personal dislike. Teamwork breaks down, talent is wasted, and people disengage from their work. And then it's easy to end up in a vicious downward spiral of negativity. If you're to keep your chapter working effectively, you need to stop this downward spiral as soon as possible. And I will say from 15 years of my career, the earlier you can figure out how to deal with conflict, the better off you'll be in the workplace. There are 5 main styles of dealing with conflict that vary in their degrees of cooperativeness and assertiveness. People typically have preferred conflict resolution style. However, different styles are most useful in different situations. So let me explain the different styles. The styles are competitive. People who tend towards a competitive style take a firm stand and know what they want. They usually operate from a position of power, drawn from things like position, rank, expertise, or persuasive ability. This style can be useful when there's an emergency or a decision needs to be made fast. When the decision is unpopular, or when the defending against someone is trying to exploit the situation selfishly. However, it can leave people feeling bruised, unsatisfied, and resentful in less urgent situations. Collaborative. People tending towards a collaborative style try to meet the needs of all people involved. These people can be highly assertive, but unlike the competition. They cooperate effectively and acknowledge that everyone is important. This style is useful when you need to bring together a variety of viewpoints to get the best solution, or where there's been previous conflicts in the group, or when the situation is just too important for a simple trade-off. Compromising. People who prefer a compromising style tend to find a solution that will at least partially satisfy everyone. Everyone is expected to give up something, and the compromiser also expects to relinquish something. Compromise is useful when the cost of conflict is higher than the cost of losing ground, when equal strength opponents are at a standstill, or where there's a looming deadline. Accommodating. This style indicates a willingness to meet the needs of others at the expense of the person's own needs. The accommodator also often knows how to give in to others, but can be persuaded to surrender a position even when it's not warranted. This person is not assertive, but is highly cooperative. Accommodation is appropriate when the issues matter more to the other party, when peace is more valuable than winning, or when you need to be in a position to collect this favor you gave. However, people may not return favors, and overall this approach is unlikely to get the best outcomes. Avoiding. People tending towards this style seek to evade conflict entirely. This style is typified by delegating controversial decisions, accepting default decisions, and not wanting to hurt any feelings. It can be appropriate when victory is possible, when controversy is trivial, or when someone else is in a better position to solve the problem. However, in many situations, this is a weak and ineffective approach to take. Once you understand these styles, you can use them to think about the most appropriate approach for the situation you're in. You can also think about your own approach and learn how you need to change if this is necessary. Ideally, you can adopt an approach that meets the situation, resolves the problem, respects people's legitimate interests, and mends damaging working relationships. So based on these approaches, a starting point for dealing with conflict is to identify the overriding conflict style employed by yourself, your team, or your chapter. Over time, people's conflict management styles tend to mesh, and in the right way, solve a conflict emerges. It's good to recognize when the style can be used effectively. However, to make sure that people understand different styles may suit different situations. Look at the circumstances and think about a style that might be appropriate. Then use the process below to resolve the conflict. Step 1, set the scene. If you're involved in a conflict, emphasize the fact that you're presenting your perception of the problem. Use active listening skills to ensure you hear and understand others' perceptions and positions. Restate what they've said, paraphrase, and summarize. And make sure when you talk, you're using an adult, assertive approach rather than a submissive or aggressive style. Step 2, gather information. Here you're trying to get to the underlying interests, needs, and concerns. Ask for the other person's viewpoint and confirm that you respect his or her opinion and need for his or her cooperation to solve the problem. Also try to understand his motivations and goals and see how your actions may be affecting these. Also try to understand the conflict in objective terms. Is it affecting work performance, damaging the delivery to the client, disrupting the teamwork, hampering decision-making, so on and so on? Be sure to focus on the work issues and leave the personalities out of the discussion. Listen with empathy and see the conflict from the other person's point of view. Identify issues clearly and concisely. Use I statements, remain flexible, and clarify feelings. Step 3, agree on the problem. This sounds like an obvious step, but sometimes due to different underlying needs, interests, and goals can cause people to perceive problems very differently. You need to agree on the problem that you're trying to solve before you find a mutual acceptable solution. Sometimes different people will see different but interlocking problems. If you can't reach a common perception of the problem, then at the very least you need to understand what the other person sees as the problem. Step 4, brainstorm possible solutions. If everyone's going to feel satisfied with the resolution, it will help if everyone has had fair input in generating solutions. Brainstorm possible solutions, be open to all ideas, including ones you never considered before. Step 5, negotiate a solution. By this stage, the conflict may be resolved, but both sides may better understand the position and mutually have a satisfactory solution that will be clear to all. However, you may have also uncovered some real differences between your positions. This is where a technique like a win-win negotiation can be useful and to some extent satisfies everybody. There are 3 guiding principles here. Be calm, be patient, and have respect. And I will also throw in the idea of listening to listen, not listening to reply. I think sometimes a lot of people are guilty of listening just to hear what they're going to process their reply to be instead of fully listening to what the person is saying. Some additional ways to aid in conflict resolution is to follow these guidelines. Make sure that good relationships are the first priority. As far as possible, make sure you treat the other calmly and that you try to build a mutual respect. Do your best to be courteous to one another and remain constructive under pressure. Keep people and problems separate. Recognize that in many cases, the other person is not just being difficult. Real and valid differences can lie behind conflictive positions. By separating the problem from the person, real issues can be debated without damaging work relationships. Pay attention to the interests that are being presented. By listening carefully, you'll most likely understand why the person is adopting his or her position. Listen first, talk second. To solve a problem effectively, you have to understand where the other person is coming before defending your own position. Set out the facts. Agree and establish the objective. Observable elements that will have an impact on the decision. Explore options together. Be open to the idea that a third position may exist, and you can get to this idea jointly. So before we wrap up, let's go back and touch on the highlights. The policies the fraternity have created are there for a reason, and it's to help to protect our members. Breaking the policies can end in great consequences. So if you don't understand anything in a policy, ask. The Heritage Center and your regional management team are here to help so we can avoid any risk management issues. Conflict in the chapter can be incredibly destructive to good teamwork. Managed the wrong way, real and legitimate differences between people can quickly spiral out of control, resulting in situations where cooperation breaks down and team's mission is threatened. This is particularly the case when wrong approaches to conflict are used. To calm these situations down, it helps to take a positive approach to conflict resolution, where discussion is courteous and non-confrontational, and the focus is on the issue rather than individuals. If this is done, then as long as people listen carefully and explore facts, issues, and possible solutions properly, conflict can often be resolved effectively. Back to you, Mackenzie.
Great. Thank you, Chrissy. That was certainly a lot of really good information, and it is going to wrap up the content portion of the program. So now we want to hear from all of you guys listening in. As stated earlier, you can launch the Q&A widget from the menu dock to submit your questions. This feature will remain open even in on-demand viewing, and if we do not get to your questions, we will respond via email. We already have a few coming in, but if you have any questions about our fraternity policies, conflict resolution, any of that content, be sure to submit your questions for Chrissy to answer. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and start with the first question here, and that's, our chapter has started to pick up some bad traditions, including hazing pledges. What are some good alternatives to hazing that you can share?
Sure, Mackenzie, that's a great question. Definitely community service is a great way to unite people and to instill some of the skills that we're trying to put in through pledges that sometimes come off through hazing events, such as adopting a family as a chapter, serving in a soup kitchen, helping with a highway cleanup, working at a local shelter. You can also work on some professional development, the whole purpose why we're here. So have a career night, maybe have a corporate speaker or an alumni presentation come in. Also, social activities are fun, and you don't have to include drugs or alcohol or hazing to make something fun. Intramural sports can often be competitive and fun. When I was a student, we had a great time with intramural sports, playing other fraternities, sororities, and school clubs.
Those are really great answers, and I think that you touched on the community service, touching on all of our different core values, trying to incorporate those into the activities that you do in your chapter. Okay, the next question we have is, our chapter does not have a compliance committee. I know you touched on that a little bit, but what can they do to help start one, and who should be members of this committee?
Sure. So there's a handout, I believe, that you can download directly from the presentation that talks about getting your compliance committee started. But this would be a great way to get maybe some seniors that are, if you have anybody that's a risk management major, this is really great for them to use to prepare for their career and to be able to talk about in their interview. Or maybe find a good mix of members, not only seniors, but bring in some younger members as well to offer different perspective. And I would certainly balance male and female.
Great. Next question we have here is, our chapter has had some concerns with our alumni that are engaging with members of the chapter in a manner that's very unbecoming of being a brother. How can we resolve this conflict?
Sure. Well, first of all, I would say make sure that you treat the alumni members with respect and don't come off as you know best or you know all, but definitely explain to them that policies and things have changed. So, for example, an alumni that maybe comes up that's been gone for 15 years, back when they read the ritual manual, it talked about blindfolding the pledges because that was part of the ritual. Well, that's no longer acceptable to fraternity ritual policies or university policies, and they may not know that, or they may not understand. So it's certainly acceptable to talk to your alumni, even provide them an updated risk management policy handout that has all the policies on there, so that way they can know all the policies. And then if you have somebody that's getting out of control, feel free to ask them to leave. As I said before, you're definitely the caretaker of the charter, and it's your responsibility to make sure the chapter stays open. We've had several cases where alumni have come in and conducted hazing or have brought alcohol to events where they shouldn't have, and the chapter got in trouble for that because they do need to follow the rules regardless. And if you are having trouble with an alumni who won't go or won't stop showing up to things, then reach out to the Heritage Center and they can assist you.
Good answer. Yes, good answer that we can always reach out to Heritage Center and we are able to help you here. It looks like
Yeah, and
people
I
are
have
a little bit confused. Oh, go ahead and finish.
I was going to say I have a quick story to talk about tradition, and I think it ties into risk management as well as alumni, is that, so you think of a cage, and it's got some monkeys in it, and at the very top of the ladder, there's a banana. And so the monkeys go up, and they go to grab for the banana, and when they reach for the banana, they all get sprayed with water. They're furious. So the next day, banana goes up to the top of the ladder, the monkeys climb to the top, they get sprayed with water. They're furious. So after a while, the monkeys stop going up to get the banana because they know they're going to get sprayed with water. So a couple weeks later, they take a monkey out and they put a new monkey in. So the monkeys are sitting there and they put a banana at the top and the new monkey goes to get it. And the other monkeys beat them up because they don't want to get sprayed with water. So the new monkey didn't know that they shouldn't go up to get the bananas, and the other people did that. So go one by one, all the original monkeys have been renewed and they're all new monkeys, but nobody goes up to the banana and nobody knows why, because of all the original monkeys have been taken. It's just the way it's always been done. And so that's the way sometimes tradition happens in the chapter. You don't know why you do it. You're not quite sure where it came from, but it's just tradition and it's how it's always been done. Well, first of all, that could mean that that's not true. It could be that somebody created this and it's not really tradition that's been there that long. Or it could be just because it's tradition doesn't mean you have to continue it. Times and policies change, and it's important that your traditions reflect that.
It's a really good story. It actually kind of ties into another question that we have here, and that's just what do you do when you have these bad traditions? Like, what's a good process for getting rid of them and putting the new good traditions in place?
Sure. So I think, any chapter is going to be resistant to change, so you can't go through and just completely change all of them. But you can start looking at the tradition and say, okay, does this tradition completely need to be removed, or are there elements of it that are risky? And if there's just elements, then you brainstorm as a chapter together. What are some ways we can replace the risky elements of it and still keep the tradition? Or if it's completely risky, then you get rid of it altogether and you come up with another alternative event to replace it with.
Great answer. All right, next question we have here is we've talked about the JRB, the Chapter Judicial Review Boards, and both the Fraternity Judicial Committee. So what's the kind of the difference between the two, and when should you use each of them?
So the Judicial Review Committee the JRB board is the local chapter. And this doesn't have to be a standing committee in the fact that these are the members of the JRB, that's all they do. It could certainly be made of people that have a position already on the finance committee or the membership committee. They're just convened in case they needed to be used. So let's say, for example, a chapter is going through an issue and a member comes and does something that is not in violation of any of the risk management policies, but it's definitely in violation of what the fraternity and the chapter believes is good behavior. So maybe the brother is doing something on campus that makes people look at Alpha Kappa Psi in the wrong light. So the JRB could come together, they could talk to different brothers, talk to different people to do their own investigation following the policies of the fraternity, and then they could find out, yes, this brother is responsible and they have 10 hours of community service, or no, they're not responsible. So that's the role of the JRB. The Judiciary Committee is mainly for large violations of alcohol or hazing policies within the fraternity, as well as sexual harassment, which we didn't cover tonight. And so they would come in and deem, is an investigation necessary? If so, can it just be done with phone interviews, or do we need to send somebody onto campus to do interviews with the members? And after the interviews are conducted, then they take a look at the charges and they say whether or not the chapter as a whole was responsible. They may identify some people that were kind of ringleaders that need to be disciplined appropriately on a separate manner. They make a recommendation to the board of directors on what the discipline should be, and then the board approves it and it's enacted.
Great, thanks for that clarification there. The next question we have deals with pledges specifically and risk management issues when you're dealing with pledges. When is it appropriate to put them on an action plan? When is it appropriate to drop them? Can you put them on an action plan after you drop them? How should pledges and risk management issues be handled?
Sure. So I think you have to look at the varying degree of the policy violation. So if it was sexual harassment or something of that case, I would definitely elevate it up to the Judiciary Committee to look at. Sexual harassment is a very sticky situation in the fact that you're, putting allegations against somebody that could leave a mark on them for life. So you want to make sure to be very careful when you handle those. Let's say, for example, a pledge was caught drinking underage. Well, then that would probably be a good time to do a pledge action plan. And there's information in there about in PEP and in Road to Brotherhood on how to do a pledge action plan. And so you would follow those rules, sit down with pledge, XYZ, and let them know what the policies are of the risk management of the fraternity and give them some things that they need to work on, and then that would be evaluated. As far as pledge action plans after a pledge is dropped, that's not when you do it. You need to be making sure to do it before a pledge is dropped. It's similar to a performance evaluation that somebody might receive in the workplace. 9 times out of 10, an employer won't just up and fire you. You would have had warning about your behavior and been given time and ways to fix that.
Great. Speaking about the pledge process and pledge programs, do you have any good tips on how to kind of process and make it more efficient, better, getting rid of all those risk management issues?
I'm sorry, Mackenzie, you broke up. What did you say?
Yeah, as we're talking about the pledge process and the pledge programming, do you have any tips on how to improve the process and kind of get rid of those risk management issues and make it a little bit more beneficial for the pledges?
Sure. So I would definitely take a look at your pledge calendar, so to speak, overall, and all the activities that you're asking of them. The biggest area sometimes for risk management issues is the amount of events and the time of the events. So, for example, if you have a social that goes until 11 or 12 o'clock at night and then they're expected to be back at the university at 6 a.m. for the ritual, that could create undue stress. So I would definitely take a look at your kind of collective requirements, because while one thing might not seem like a big deal when you put it in the overall perspective of how much you're asking the pledges to do, it can be. Another rule of thumb I always say is, a lot of chapters suffer from member apathy. So they're great pledges, and then once they become brothers, they're not as engaged. And sometimes that's because we spend so much time training pledges to be pledges that we don't spend a lot of time focusing on how they can be good brothers. So I always recommend that your pledge activities should mimic the number of activities that your active brothers are required to do. If pledges are required to be spending 8 hours a week on AK Psi and brothers are only required 2, well, of course you're going to have apathy when they cross over and become initiates. And then also use the rule of thumb about what would the university think, or what would the media think, or a parent think if they saw this. And if there's something that you wouldn't feel 100% comfortable sharing with somebody start to finish, then that would be a great event to start looking at and saying, how can we make this more healthy for the pledge process?
Great answer. It looks like at this time we don't have any more questions in our queue. So Chrissy, do you have any final thoughts or pieces of advice for our listeners today?
I would just say, take risk management seriously. It doesn't have to be scary, and it doesn't have to be something that you try to avoid, but it's certainly good skills on how to keep your chapter healthy. We've been a fraternity for more than 100 years, and that's definitely been because we've been practicing good risk management. So let's continue that.
Great. Thanks, Chrissy. And I also want to thank all of our participants and callers today for you guys' great questions and comments. For any follow-up question or conversation, feel free to contact Chrissy with the information that's provided on the screen. You can also input it into the Q&A widget if you're rewatching this webinar at a later point. Again, I want to thank Chrissy for her insight and expertise today. Finally, we do have upcoming programs listed on the aksi.org website, including upcoming webinars and new e-learnings available for you to watch. Continue to check out the website and our social media as we add new resources available to you. And if you have any suggestions for future topics, please send them to education@aksi.org. Again, I want to thank you to our presenter, and thank you all for joining us.